All right, get ready to dive into quantum mechanics today.
Always up for that.
We're looking at Scott Aaronson's PHYS 771 Lecture 9, Quantum, and wow, he really shakes things up. He says quantum mechanics, it's not really physics, it's more like an operating system. What do you think about that?
It's a really insightful comparison. It makes you rethink quantum mechanics.
hmm
Imagine, instead of particles and waves, we're talking about the fundamental rules of how reality works.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So just like an operating system controls how software runs on hardware, quantum mechanics sets the stage for all those other physics theories.
So instead of like Windows or Mac OS, we've got quantum mechanics running the show.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
he can just quantize classical physics then, like install an old game on a new computer, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Aronson uses quantizing to describe how we have to adapt those theories to fit within the quantum framework.
It's like giving Newton's laws of motion a quantum upgrade then.
Right, precisely.
Okay, that makes sense. But if it's not about particles and waves, then what exactly is this quantum operating system doing?
At its core, it's about information, probability, and how we observe things. But here's the kicker. Aronson suggests that quantum mechanics comes about when we allow for something that seems impossible: negative probabilities.
Hold on, negative probabilities. That sounds like something out of science fiction. How can there even be a negative chance of something happening?
It's definitely a mind-bending idea, and Aronson knows it goes against our everyday intuition. In our normal world, we use regular probabilities. Always positive, they always add up to 100%. But in the quantum world, things are different.
So it's not just that we haven't figured out how to measure these probabilities yet. It's like the rules are completely different.
That's it. Instead of adding probabilities, imagine we're squaring them,
Yeah.
then adding those results. That's the two norm, a different way to measure the size of a vector.
Okay, go on.
Think of it like trying to get to a building across a field. You could walk around on the sidewalk or cut straight across the grass.
Shortcut.
Exactly. Both get you there, but they use different paths, different ways to measure distance.
So in quantum mechanics, we're always taking the shortcut
Mm,
with these squared probabilities, this two norm thing.
you got it.
But how does any of that explain all the weirdness we hear about, like particles being in multiple states at the same time?
It all comes down to how we represent information. Instead of a bit being a 0 or a 1, we have a qubit. Think of a dial that can point anywhere on a circle. That's your qubit.
So not just a straight line between 0 and 1 anymore.
Right.
Unlike a spinning pointer, it could be pointing anywhere.
Exactly. The location of that pointer, that's the information. And the strength of each possibility, that's determined by those squared probabilities. We call them amplitudes.
So it's not just a point on a line anymore. It's like a spinning pointer that could be pointing in multiple directions all at once.
Exactly. And here's the catch. When we actually measure the qubit, that dial is forced to settle on one spot, a definite 0, 1. Observing it collapses all the possibilities.
So that's where the whole observation changes reality idea comes from.
You got it.
It's not just about our instruments or anything. It's built into how information itself works at that level.
Exactly. But what's even wilder is how we can actually manipulate these qubit states, how we change the direction of our spinning pointer.
Okay, how do we do that?
In classical physics, we use things called stochastic matrices for transformations. But in quantum mechanics, we use unitary matrices.
Unitary matrices. Those sound a bit intimidating. Is that where the math starts to get really complicated?
They might sound complicated, but think of them like a rule book. They tell our quantum spinning pointer how it's allowed to move. These matrices, they make sure that no matter what, that pointer always stays somewhere on the circle, representing a valid probability state.
Okay, so these unitary matrices, they're like the rules of the dance for our qubit.
That's a great way to put it.
But where do these negative probabilities actually come in? It still feels like we're trying to mix oil and water.
It's when these negative and positive amplitudes interact that things get really interesting. Remember, those amplitudes of those squared probabilities, they tell us how likely we are to measure a qubit as a 0 or a 1. And the key is they can be negative.
Wait, so we're not just subtracting probabilities, we're saying the probabilities themselves can be less than 0?
It's not that the final probabilities go below 0, but the amplitudes we use to calculate them, those can be negative. Think of it like waves interfering.
Okay.
Two waves, they can combine to make a bigger wave, or they can cancel each other out. That's what's happening with these amplitudes' constructive or destructive interference.
So kind of like those noise-canceling headphones. They don't actually get rid of sound. They just use sound waves that are out of sync to cancel out the noise you don't want.
Exactly. And just like with those sound waves, this interference, it's what leads to all the really weird stuff we see in quantum mechanics, things that wouldn't be possible with just classical probabilities.
Aaronson uses that example in the lecture about rotating the qubit state. Can you walk me through that? I'm still trying to wrap my head around how this negative interference actually works in practice.
Absolutely. Let's think about that spinning pointer again. Say we start with our qubit, definitely in the zero state, so our pointer is pointing straight up. Now we use a unitary transformation, rotates the pointer 45 degrees.
So it's like flipping a coin now. We have a 50-50 chance of getting a 0 or a 1.
Right. But here's the wild part. What do you think happens if we apply that same 45-degree rotation again?
Well, if I was flipping a real coin, I wouldn't know what to expect on the second flip.
You'd be right in the classical world. But in the quantum world, something amazing happens. Because we applied that second rotation, we've set it up so the negative amplitudes for measuring a 0, they perfectly cancel out. But the positive amplitudes for a 1, they add up.
Wait, so even though each rotation by itself is uncertain, the combined effect is completely certain. We know we'll measure a 1.
Precisely. It's this interplay of positive and negative amplitudes, this quantum interference, that's at the heart of why quantum mechanics is so different, so counterintuitive. It's like the universe is playing a game with two sets of rules.
Mind officially blown. But now I'm wondering, this whole squaring amplitudes thing, this 2 norm, if it's so fundamental to quantum mechanics, is it just a mathematical coincidence? Or is there something deeper going on?
That is a fantastic question, and it gets to the heart of why this lecture is so thought-provoking. Aronson actually addresses this directly when he asks, why square the amplitudes at all? Why not cube them or raise them to the fourth power?
Yeah, why not just cube them? What's so special about squaring? Is there some reason, or is it just one of those things physicists say we have to accept?
There are a couple of compelling answers, actually, and each one sheds some light on the deep structure of quantum mechanics. One answer lies in a pretty obscure mathematical theorem, Gleason's theorem.
Okay, I've heard of theorems. Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Okay, imagine you have a magical machine. You put in a quantum state, remember, that's our amplitudes, and out pops a probability. Gleason's theorem essentially says that A and Y machine that follows a few basic rules of probability.
Like, the probabilities have to add up to 1?
Exactly. Any machine that does that must, no exceptions, be equivalent to just squaring the amplitudes, the way we do in quantum mechanics. It's a pretty powerful result. It's telling us the squaring rule isn't arbitrary. It's a consequence of how probabilities fundamentally work.
So it's like, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's gotta be a duck. If it acts like a probability in the quantum world, it has to use squared amplitudes.
Exactly. But Gleason's theorem, it can be a bit hard to wrap your head around. Luckily, Aaronson gives us a more intuitive way to think about it, too. Remember our talk about the 1 norm and the 2 norm, those different ways of measuring distance.
Like walking around the sidewalk versus cutting across the grass.
That's right. It turns out the 1 norm and 2 norm, they have very special properties that make them uniquely suited for building consistent physics theories.
Okay, so how does that work in the quantum world?
If you try to use any other norm to build a quantum theory, it falls apart. Either you end up with a theory where nothing interesting happens, or the math just leads to contradictions, like probabilities not adding up correctly.
So the 1 norm and 2 norm are like the Goldilocks norms. Not too simple, not too complex, just right for a universe like ours. But if those norms are so special, why are complex numbers all over quantum mechanics? They always seem like a convenient trick, not a fundamental part of reality. I mean, shouldn't describing reality be, oh, real? Right? Shouldn't it just be real numbers? Why bring in the imaginary stuff?
It's a question that's puzzled physicists for a long time. But as Aaronson points out, complex numbers, they're not just some mathematical quirk. They seem to be baked into the very fabric of how things work at the quantum level.
So there's more to it than just making the equations look nice.
Oh, absolutely. One key point Aaronson makes is that complex numbers let us have smooth, continuous transformations in quantum mechanics. Remember our spinning pointer analogy for the qubit.
How could I forget? It's been spinning in my head ever since.
Well, imagine you're trying to smoothly rotate that pointer from one spot to another. In the quantum world, we need complex numbers to do that. Those kinds of smooth transformations are super important for how quantum systems change over time.
So it's like those complex numbers give quantum mechanics the extra room it needs to do its thing.
Precisely. Aaronson gives this great example. Imagine you're trying to flip a two-dimensional object, like a pancake, but you can't leave the second dimension. We just can't do it. You need to go into the third dimension to flip it over.
It's like we're all stuck in flatland, right? Not knowing about that third dimension that makes all these seemingly impossible moves possible.
Exactly. Complex numbers give us that extra dimension to work with, allowing for those smooth changes in quantum mechanics, changes that wouldn't be possible with just real numbers.
Makes you wonder if there are even more dimensions out there, beyond what we can see, that are essential for the universe to even function. But before we get too far down that road, we've talked a lot about what makes quantum mechanics strange. But there's also a kind of elegance to it. Aronson talks about linearity. Why is that so important?
You're right. Linearity often gets lost in the shuffle, but it's crucial. We take it for granted so much of the time in physics that if two things happen, the combined effect is just the sum of their individual effects. But imagine if the universe wasn't linear.
Okay, now I gotta know, what kind of chaos would that cause?
In a nonlinear world, those neat quantum states we have, represented by those points on a circle, they can become all warped and entangled in unpredictable ways. Imagine two totally different quantum states, like our pointer pointing in opposite directions, and somehow we could squash them together so they're nearly identical.
So instead of clear-cut states, everything would be a blurry mess.
Exactly. And that blurriness wouldn't just be our measurements, it would be reality itself. But here's where things get really interesting from a computational standpoint. Aronson explains that in a nonlinear quantum world, we might be able to solve some problems insanely fast. Problems that would take even the most powerful computers we can imagine an impossible amount of time to solve.
You're talking about those NP-complete problems, the ones mathematicians and computer scientists would kill to solve efficiently.
You got it. These problems, they're everywhere. From logistics and scheduling to cracking the codes that keep our data safe online. They're so tough because the number of possible solutions explodes as the problem gets bigger.
Like finding a needle in an exponentially growing haystack.
Perfect analogy. But in a nonlinear quantum world, it's like you could search through all those haystacks at the same time, instantly finding the needle. It would be a computational revolution.
But also kind of scary. Being able to break any code, optimize anything, that's a lot of power.
A double-edged sword for sure. And while it's still up in the air whether those NP-complete problems could be solved easily in our universe, the fact that quantum mechanics, at least as we understand it now, seems to say no. It's both reassuring and kind of makes you think.
Really makes you appreciate the balance of rules that govern our universe, doesn't it? Quantum mechanics is this wild dance between order and chaos, the familiar and the utterly bizarre.
Well said. And even though we've barely scratched the surface of these topics, I think the key takeaway here is that quantum mechanics isn't just about physics. It's about information, probability, the very nature of numbers themselves.
It's like Aronson said, maybe quantum mechanics is just what you get when you crank probability theory up to 11. But like any good deep dive, we end up with more questions than answers. What other obvious, in retrospect, truths are still out there, just waiting to be discovered?
Who knows? But maybe just the act of searching for those answers will lead us to even deeper understanding of how things really work.
It definitely makes you want to dig out that physics textbook and take another crack at quantum mechanics. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride. Until next time, keep those big questions coming and never stop exploring the universe's infinite mysteries.